X-Men Origins Wolverine. Oh boy. This is actually the first X-Men movie I went to go and watch at the cinema. Yeah, not exactly the best first movie to go and watch for the X-Men franchise in the cinema. It was directed by Gavin Hood, as the title states, as an origin story for the character of Wolverine, as to how he got into the Weapon X project and how he ended up losing his memories and gets into the situation that we find him in the original X-Men movie. This was meant to kickstart a new wave of spin-off movies in the X-Men universe, because originally it was going to be this movie, which is X-Men Origins Wolverine, and then the next planned movie was actually going to be X-Men Origins Magneto. However, because of the critical reception that this movie received, that movie ended up being canned and instead turned into X-Men First Class. Now, the fact that this movie failed to launch a spin-off franchise should automatically tell you as to how people thought about this film. It's awful. One of the worst comic book movies I have seen. Not only does it have an incredibly lousy script, a very, very boring plotline. Just a plotline that meanders along to nowhere, with characters that you honestly just don't really care about and are not that memorable at all, and the complete lack of disregard and disrespect to the comic books. You can understand why so many fans of comics hate this movie, hate it with a passion. And this is a bad movie. If you try and tell me that this is a good movie, you are wrong. The only way you can say that this is in the slightest bit enjoyable is if you say that this movie is awful and you recognise that, but you still find it fun to watch, guilty pleasure. And I will admit, this used to be a guilty pleasure film of mine, but the more I watched it, the more I realised how utterly trash it was. I'm not even going to bother with the story, because what's the point? We already know the key essentials of Wolverine's story if you've watched the original trilogy, and I prefer to think of it that way. Let's just get straight into the few positives I have with this movie. The only one for the few positives I can have with the film is Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. He literally is carrying this whole movie on his shoulders, and I mean, he will always be Wolverine, and he is still great as the character, even if some of the lines he's given are just so awful, and the script around him is just terrible. But he still gives a great performance. I also liked Danny Huston as Stryker, as this younger version of the character. I didn't like him as much as Brian Cox's version in X2, but he was still really cool, and I just liked seeing his as a younger version and seeing what his relationship was like with Wolverine before what it ended up becoming like in X2. And much to people's dismay, I actually really liked Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool when he first appears as the character. In that scene where he has all them weird awful CGI physics where he's able to flip his sword 360 degrees. I actually like that version of Deadpool. I thought it was cool. As long as he just had the actual Deadpool suit on, then I think that scene could have worked in some way or another. But I actually liked him in that scene. It's just what they did with him later on in the movie, which we'll get onto later, that I really didn't like. Okay, those are the three positives I have about this movie. Now let's bash this shit. Okay? Let's get on with the first problem I have with this movie, and that is the story. The story is absolutely useless. The biggest problem this film had was the fact that we already knew the basics of Wolverine's origin story. He was going to become Weapon X, and he was going to lose his memory. These were two things that we were expecting from this movie. What the film fails at is being able to give us interesting and investing things that happen in between these moments that we as an audience will not only care about, but also remember when we walk out of the cinema. I don't remember any other moments in this movie that were like, oh yeah, that was like a really good satisfying moment, other than when he becomes Weapon X and when he loses his memory. But the only reason for those things is because they were either teased or shown in the original trilogy, because everything else that happens in between those moments is not that great. The story about how he got his name of Wolverine, how it inspired him to take up the name Wolverine. Boring as fuck. One of the worst scenes in the whole movie. The scene where he confronts the Blob to try and find out where Stryker's island is. Boring as fuck. Oh, and it's just the same thing over and over and over again. And it's just nothing interesting and new at all. The script writing is awful. Whoever wrote the script for this movie seriously needs to have been sacked, because it was pretty shocking. Also, the lack of disregard and respect for the comics. What they did with some of the characters in this movie and the changes they made, fucking unforgivable. It was stupid. I don't know what the hell they were doing with Sabretooth as well, with his weird tiger dance crawl along the floor. That was some of the worst wire work I've seen in years. It is awful. It is terrible what they did with Sabretooth in this movie. I like the fact that they made him his brother, even though it would have made his appearance in the original X-Men movie making no sense at all. Because of the fact that it's like, okay, if these two were brothers, why the hell didn't he show a bit more compassion to Wolverine in the original X-Men movie? But yeah, he appears in this film. He's awful. He's awful what they do with him. I didn't like I didn't like the actor as Sabretooth. Can't remember his name. But I just didn't like him as a character, and I just don't feel like they did a whole lot with him, to be honest. Gambit, a character that, they hyped up so much, they're like, oh my god, you're going to see Gambit in this movie, he's going to be so good. He's in the movie for like 5 minutes. And admittedly, he was cool, okay? I thought he was pretty cool in the film, but he's barely in it. He's barely in the movie. And when they advertised him and promoted him as much as they did, and it's like, oh, he's only in the movie for 5 minutes, it was so disappointing and so mentally mind-numbing. But the worst part and the worst offender was by far what they did with Deadpool in this movie. It is fucking atrocious. I love Deadpool as a character. He's one of my favourite anti-heroes in comics. And what they did with him in this movie is unforgivable. They sewed the merc with a mouth shut. Taking away the Green Arrow's arrow and bow, that's like taking away Superman's ability to fly and making him a scared little kid. It's like taking away Thor's hammer. It's like you're taking away one of the most iconic parts of a character completely that everybody loves. It was awful, and they gave him powers as well. So many powers that he doesn't have in the comics, and his whole story as well. Oh my god, who the fuck wrote this? Like, who wrote this shit? Because it is awful. Like, they clearly did not read any of the Deadpool comics, or if they did, they're like, what can I get away with, that has nothing to do with the character at all. It was absolutely crazy. Oh my god, I fucking hate this. The CGI in this movie as well is shocking. It is some of the worst CGI I've seen in a big budget movie. This movie has a budget of $179 million. But the CGI would make you think completely differently. It looks like I'm watching a cartoon at times. Like, there's awful CGI in the movie throughout. And like I said with my criticism of Sabretooth, the wire work in this movie is awful. There's some atrocious wire work, in particular in a assault on a building in Africa near the start of the movie with Stryker's team. Some of the wire work there is awful. It's just not good at all. It's shocking. And, the movie is incredibly boring as well. It's just very boring, slow-paced, lackluster. Nothing, like I said in the criticism of the plot, nothing happens at all to make the film memorable in any way possible. And I also found the ending to being incredibly anticlimactic as well. Because, spoiler alert for the movie, the film essentially ends with him getting an adamantium bullet and losing his memories. Which didn't make a whole lot of sense, because, I always assumed that the fact that how he lost his memories was because when he had the adamantium into his body in the first place, it erased his memories from that moment. But no, he gets hit by an adamantium bullet, that's what erases his memories. Pretty shit, to be honest. So yeah. I mean, I could go on with 100 other criticisms about this movie, but I want to keep this review short and sweet, because I hate this movie. Don't like it at all. It's pretty awful. In fact, no, it's not pretty awful. It is awful. So let's get into the final grade. I think you all know what I'm going to give this movie. This movie gets a big fat fucking F. It is one of the worst comic book movies I've ever seen. Anybody who says this movie is good is an absolute fucking joker. And yeah, it's awful. Don't watch it if you're going to be doing reruns, because I guarantee you will not miss out on anything. That was my review for X-Men Origins Wolverine. Yeah, not exactly a great movie. Definitely the worst film in the franchise. Up next is going to be my review for, thankfully, a much superior movie, and that being X-Men First Class. So stick around for that review, coming up soon on the channel. And with that being said, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.